So again, we are glad to be joined by State Representative for the 7th Middlesex District, Representative Lewis. Representative, thank you again for taking time out of your day to come visit us at the studio once again.
Oh, anytime. It's grateful to be invited.
And this conversation leads up to the primary vote on September 3rd, Tuesday, the day after Labor Day, and you are in a primary race for your seat on Beacon Hill. But I wanted to start by taking a step back now. I'm sure it's hard for you to believe, but it's coming up on almost a decade since you were elected to the State House. What are some of the lessons that you've learned since 2016, since first winning this seat?
It does seem like just yesterday I was first elected. It's actually when I look at my kids and realize how much they have grown since I was first elected 8 years ago. But this is a job that's all about relationships. And so when you start, no matter what you did before, there's a learning curve that comes with it. For me, I have focused on getting to know my colleagues, getting to know statewide advocates, but most importantly, getting to know my constituents. When you run a race, not everybody votes. Not everyone's a registered voter. You're hyper-targeted in who you talk to because you know how elections work. But once you're elected, some of my colleagues make the mistake of only focusing on the folks that were with them from the beginning. People may remember when I was first elected 8 years ago, it was a contested primary. There were two other great Democrats that ran. I used to joke sometimes that I was running to be everyone's second choice because I enjoyed spending so much time getting to know some of the other folks and their supporters. But in the last 8 years, I have had a chance to get to know thousands and thousands of area residents. And those relationships have helped me to craft legislation, to know where to put my political energy, how to spend my political capital, and try to be everywhere in the community so that most people hopefully know who their state rep is or how to get a hold of them. And for me, it doesn't seem like anyone's shy about grabbing me at the farmer's market or at the senior center or sending me the thousands of emails I get every year from my constituents.
And that's a good transition into this most recent term. Since 2022, what are some of the legislative efforts that you've taken part of that you're specifically proud about?
With every passing year, the list of successes is growing. It's interesting. My focus is often on bills that my name is not the number one on the list. Some folks, when you get elected, you run on a certain level of certain ideas, and so you want to file bills on those. I think it's a mistake to forget that there were people that did this work before and that there will be people who continue doing this work long after I'm put out to pasture. And so most of my energy at the State House is actually supporting legislation that other people are taking the prime lead on. This session in the House, we were able to move forward on a bill as it related to allowing companies that currently use gas and oil to transition to be able to use things like geothermal. I'm the co-chair of the House Progressive Caucus, 66 growing members, and we made this one of our priority bills. We have an example of this right here in Framingham. My name is listed as a co-sponsor, but a lot of my energy was making sure that core components of that got into the final bill. There are, of course, things that I take the lead on and lean on others to support with. I worked with the governor in the treasurer's office last year, so early part of the session, to expand veteran bonuses that the state makes available to folks who have served our country. Major legislative victory in the budget. Just last month, the governor signed our current budget, where I worked with colleagues but took the lead on a major change in allowing pharmacists to do more as it relates to public health emergencies and public health prevention. We built on a law we changed 2 years ago as it related to allowing pharmacists to dispense and prescribe certain hormonal contraceptives. And we built on that success and have now allowed them to do so much more. Those are just a couple examples, but the last one in particular came from an idea that I had learned from a colleague in Sydney, Australia, of all places, of something they had done there to make sure more folks have access to things like HIV prevention. And from that, working with CVS and Walgreens, and lobbyists sometimes get a bad rap, but they know their business, they know their focus, working with LGBTQ organizations, public health experts, and crafting legislation that in this case is like 10 words, but it is going to make a huge difference in countless people's lives.
Now, you had mentioned a couple of minutes ago that your race in 2016 was part of a contested primary.
Yes.
Same goes for this year. It's the first time since then, the first time that you're sitting as an incumbent taking part in a primary election for the 7th district seat. What's that process been like to have that change this time around in 24?
So when I first ran, I was relatively new I was involved in the Framingham Dems for many previous years. But it was my first time running for the race, and so a lot of my energy was spent knocking on doors and introducing myself for the first time. For the last 8 years, before I learned of this contested election, I have spent most of my time locally building on those same relationships. Monday morning, 11:15, I'm always at the Ashland Senior Center every Monday preparing to serve lunch. I clean up, I run home, I respond to emails for an hour, and then I go to the Callahan Center, Framingham Senior Center, to play chair volleyball. Just like two concrete examples of a decision I made early on of, okay, I know who voted for me, I know what doors I would knock on if there were a race, but how can I make sure I'm available and everywhere as much as I can be? And so this time around, I'm continuing to push legislation, even though I'm in the midst of a campaign. The legislative session is not over. We just moved to the governor's desk a major maternal health bill just yesterday. I have 3 or 4 priority bills that have either passed the House or the Senate in the last 6 months that I am confident I'll be able to get passed in both houses into the governor's desk. I'm still doing the chair volleyball, I'm still showing up at the farmer's market, I'm still serving lunch at least once a week. But in addition to that, I'm also now back on the doors. And this time around, the major difference, to actually get to the question you asked, is that most people have interacted with me, especially in Ashland, where I've represented for the last 8 years. My Framingham part of the district shifted some with redistricting. But for the most part, in Ashland and Framingham, when I knock, people either know my name, because when they reached out to me about unemployment benefits, we helped them. They maybe recognized my face from showing up at the Callahan Center or wherever it was. And I think what I'm hoping to do, is to continue to build on those relationships. Folks aren't shy. Later today, there's a concert on the green. I will show up an hour and a half early to help folks set up, and I'll just be there. And my family won't come. They never come anymore because they know that literally they'd have to queue up to spend time with me there, because someone tonight is going to show up with a document that looks fraudulent, and they're going to want to know if it's legit, and I'm going to call a federal partner to check. Someone's going to pull me aside to share a very personal story about their insurance company refusing to cover a treatment, to see what I will do. Yesterday, farmer's market, we had a conversation with somebody who was struggling with a pharmacist around an insurance claim. I still haven't seen a job description about what a state rep does, but our office tries to do everything we can within the limitations of time, space, and the law. And yeah, in the midst of that, I'll just keep knocking, and most of the time when I knock, the person on the other end has a question for me. And I leave every door knocking experience with a new to-do list of folks to follow up with. So maybe I should just do it all the time, regardless if I have a campaign. Just keep going, yes.
Now, I wanted to ask you a question that relates to some of the efforts that you had just mentioned over the past couple of months on Beacon Hill. If you are to win this primary election on the 3rd, are there any other initiatives, any goals for this next term, whether it's an old initiative that you want to continue up with or a new one that you're looking to push on Beacon Hill if you are to win this primary election?
So I'm somebody who, while I'll celebrate a win for a moment, we're always immediately pivoting to the next thing. And so if it's major bill we passed this session relating to reproductive rights, I'll take the hour, I'll celebrate the win, and then we're immediately planning what's next. And so for me, youth health and wellness has always been close to my heart. Part of that is making sure our public schools are fully funded, making sure youth have resources to thrive. And my focus on suicide prevention is something that there's a major bill that I'm hoping to get across the finish line this year. If not, it will be my top priority next session, making sure youth have access to resources when they're in time of mental health crisis. The other piece is every session we have a major environmental bill, but as with all pieces of legislation, no one bill is going to take us where we need to go. And my colleagues and I understand that we can never rest on our laurels. And so I look forward to working with my colleagues to craft the next major environmental bill. But it's in some ways a difficult question because there are major victories we've had, and then we still have a couple outstanding pieces that I'm actually confident we'll get across the finish line. And if that's the case, we'll have to prepare for that next step together.
Now, your opponent in this race, Carlton Phelps, has called for a change in representation for the 7th Middlesex seat. Specifically, he's called for a greater sense of diversity, innovation within the seat, new leadership, and an additional ounce or a sense of transparency within the state legislature. How would you respond to some of those critiques from your opponent?
So first of all, I see elections as my biannual review. My constituents hire me. I have like 43,000 bosses. Not all of them can vote, not all of them do vote, but I don't have a board of directors, I don't have a boss, I have 44,000 of them. And this election gives them an opportunity to look at the things we've done together and decide if the work we have done, the successes we have had, are worthy of me having another 2 years to continue this work. I can tell you that my family is committed to continuing to be a part of this community. I have 2 kids still in Framingham Public Schools. You mentioned diversity. The legislature is becoming more and more diverse with every passing session or electoral cycle, which is great. We still have too few people of color, too few women, too few members of the LGBTQ plus community. I can tell you that there aren't very many LGBTQ plus folks, and I think in the House, I'm the only one married with kids. And so, I think diversity comes in so many different shapes and sizes. For me, I just want to continue to deliver for my neighbors and for my constituents. And the question of successes or you didn't use the word vitality, but I'm trying to remember which one you used. Innovation, yes.
Yes, yeah, I was looking through the notes.
One of the great things about this campaign is I've been forced to pause and go back and keep track, actually document all of the successes we've had, because my instinct is, Jack, wow, we passed a major bill of yours, we'll put out a press release, and then I immediately say, what's next? And so, in some ways, I'm quite grateful, because this process has forced me to stop and look back at everything we've actually done. And the time I put into this job, the time away from my family, this is my only job. Whereas my now 14-year-old put it 6 years ago, you're a very, very full-time state rep and a very, very part-time dad, which hurt. He may have wanted to go to Disney World, and so he knew where to hit me. But we have had major successes. If you look at what Framingham schools get in public education funding, that didn't happen by accident. When you look at our laws that we've needed to change in response to this hostile Supreme Court, that hasn't happened by accident. And as you look back, the bills that I've had my name on, nearly a dozen have now been signed into law. And if you look at the other major pieces of legislation, my fingerprints are all over them. And so I'm confident that my average constituent sees that, but I also know that in the last 8 years, thousands and thousands of constituents have reached out to me, unsure where to turn, and we have been able to deliver results for them. And so if there's a way for me to do something better, if there are priorities that folks think I should have that I haven't been focused on, let me know. Because most of my major successes have come from members of the community. This suicide prevention bill I'm working on was done in another state, but it's something that Ashland High School has been doing for a while. It's something that the Metro West Suicide Association brought up to me 7 years ago. When we get it, we passed it in the House, when we get it to the governor's desk, it's not going to be on me. It's going to be because so many folks said, Jack, we need to do more on this. On the transparency question, people know who I am. They know how to find me. Anyone who's ever reached out to my office gets a response. Even folks who reach out and call me the nastiest of things via email, who I've never agreed with on anything, people who are not shy about their homophobia and racism, they get a response. I don't say hey, I agree with you, but they get a response. I take the time to respond to each and every one of those people. And none of them could ever say they don't know how to get a hold of me or to express their disappointment. Each one of them around Christmas and the New Year gets a handwritten holiday card from me, as everyone in my district who's ever reached out to me does. Early on, it was 300 people. Now, I think I do about 4,000 holiday cards. If you get one and thought you were special, you are special. That is my handwriting. It's just that many people have reached out to me. People know where to find me. And on the transparency question, I've been down this road of allowing outside groups to tell me what a narrow understanding of transparency looks like. I have taken votes several years back, against the majority of my House colleagues, I joined a very small minority of people pushing for a very narrow understanding of transparency. And what I have found is the great majority of my constituents only want me to deliver results. They don't want me to spend political capital fighting behind the scenes about why things are done this way or that way. I want to deliver, and I'm going to keep doing that. And if anyone has any issues with what I've done or questions about how I voted in an internal committee poll, they can email me. The reality is, in 8 years, not a single constituent has ever reached out to me asking how I voted in a committee poll. Not Mr. Phelps, who actually has never reached out to my office on any issue. And so it's hard for me, and I'm trying not to spend too much time reflecting on the feedback from a very, very small group of people who have never actually reached out to express concern on this issue. And instead, pivoting all of my energy on continuing to deliver for the folks in Framingham, in Ashland.
And you mentioned the average voter within the district. The average voter who will be stepping into the polls or given a mail-in ballot for this primary, registered Democrat, could look at your website, could look at Carlton Phelps' website, go to the platform or values page, whatever tab it might be under, and see a pretty similar platform for the both of you. I mean, you both vouch for progress. You both stress education as a major goal, housing as a major focus, boosting public transportation being one of them, protecting rights, all within your platform. So one way or the other, of course, both being Democrats, share some similar values, but they seem pretty much in line for a lot of it, at least on the surface. What would you say to voters that sets you apart as they get ready to vote for this in this primary?
So if you go to my website, and I hope you do, electjacklewis.com, it's not just a list of priorities, it's a list of what we've actually done. And so 8 years ago, I ran on what I wanted to do. I made a lot of promises, and I've tried to work every day since I was first elected to keep and fulfill those promises. And so, yes, we may agree on a lot of issues. The difference is, over the last 8 years, I have tangible results to show for those efforts. It might be a surprise to some, but when you're first elected, you're the new state rep for Ashland and Framingham, no one hands you a piece of paper and says, like, write down state laws, we'll pass it tomorrow, the governor will sign it, like, you can make these decisions. It's not how democracy works. And as much as we wish sometimes things would move faster, the founders of our Commonwealth and the founders of our country created a system intentionally to be deliberative. And so what I have done in a relatively short period of time, 8 years, is pass more legislation that I'm the lead sponsor of and pass more legislation that I'm the co-sponsor of than the vast majority of my colleagues. And if I'm reelected, I'm just going to continue doing that. Parallel to that, the big difference is I have 8 years of relationships. Those are not easily replicatable. Someone gets elected, you're not handed like a handbook of like, when someone calls about lost luggage with an airline, you call, it doesn't exist. It involves making connections locally and at the state level and balancing those demands with making sure you show up at the senior center once or twice or 3 times a week.
Now, no matter how people vote one way or the other for the primary and especially the general election as well, how important is it for you as a state legislator, your colleagues, opponents in these races, to stress the importance of actually getting up to vote one way or the other, especially at this year and at this time?
Voting has never been more important, and not just because my name's on the ballot on September 3rd. This is actually one of the things that I've been making a core tenet of my work over the last 8 years, is making sure that those who are eligible to vote have the opportunity to vote without all of the restrictions or barriers that maybe other states put in place. So we now have mail-in voting. That didn't happen by accident. That was many years of working in the legislature, winning over colleagues, developing a broad coalition to make sure that those mail-in ballots go out. I just looked, I think, in Framingham, so in my part of the district in Framingham and Ashland, something like 7,000 people have requested mail-in ballots for this primary. When I first ran 8 years ago, only 2,000 people voted in the entire primary. And so we don't know if all 7,000 of those people are going to hand them in. We don't know who's going to vote early or vote on election day. But at last count, we already have nearly the same number of votes that have already been handed in for this election as people who voted in my first election. And so mail-in voting, we've made it as easy as possible. The pandemic allowed us to have conversations about how we keep people safe. And so I urge folks to read up on the candidates. On the Democratic primary locally, there aren't a lot of contested races. There's mine, and I hope you read what we've done together. And for those folks who haven't grabbed me at the farmer's market or reached out via email, I'm there, grab me. But we have a contested governor's council race, a position that even I have to be reminded of times what it actually does. And then presidential election, we can never take anything for granted. And for folks who are committed to a presidential candidate, there are groups that go up to New Hampshire every single week to canvass for one of the two major candidates. And once September 3rd has come and went, my efforts personally will shift to that and joining the groups from Framingham every Friday that go up to door knock for our current vice president.
Representative Lewis, again, thank you very much for taking some time out of your day to visit us and have the conversation. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Carlton, again, thank you very much for coming into the studio today to talk about your candidacy for the 7th Middlesex District. We really appreciate you coming out here to Framingham to talk with us.
Thanks for having me, Brendan.
Now, we'll talk more about your platform in just a few minutes, but I wanted to start off first. For people who may not be aware of you, I wanted to give you a chance to introduce yourself and learn more about your background.
Yeah, so my name is Carlton Phelps, originally from Washington, D.C. I've been in Metro West for 7 years. I wanted to jump into this race to really continue the legacy of the civil rights. As we know, the civil rights are not guaranteed in our country. My dad is one of the first black doctors out of the civil rights movement, mom an English teacher for 30 years. I moved up to the Metro West area to be a bank auditor for the Federal Home Loan Bank of Boston 7 years ago. As a bank auditor, I met all the presidents of the bank, all the CFOs, and I realized we really have an affordable housing crisis in this country, and especially in this area of Framingham and Ashland, where we have to get ahead of it. We have to have people that understand that intersection between housing and public policy, and I feel like I'm one of those people.
Now, sort of a two-pronged question here.
Sure.
When did you decide to contest in this primary, and why now? What made now the right time for you to throw your hat in the ring?
Yeah, so I believe it was around March 1st is when threw my hat in the ring, so to speak. The biggest thing is when I started learning more information, I started learning that Framingham and Ashland should know how their rep votes. One of the things is that we don't know how the rep votes. We don't know currently because in 2021, Jack Lewis voted against public legislation votes being public in committee. And then obviously I've talked about in 2023, he voted for $1 billion tax cut. We're down $322 million as a state per the Department of Revenue, excluding the Fair Share, excuse me. So for me, it just made sense. It was just the connection of having that finance background, that banking understanding, and how I can connect that to housing, and also transparency. I want from now on the state reps on that level to be able to share how they vote, because we need to know, as the people, we the people need to know how our state rep votes for everything from public safety on to housing, everything.
Now, this is your first time running for a seat of this stature, is that right?
That's correct.
So what are some of the things that you've learned on the campaign trail first time out?
Yeah, so the biggest thing that I've learned on the campaign trail is that everybody has an issue that affects them. And it's really big about listening, right? Always becoming a better listener, because everybody has something, whether that's education and the MCAS, we've heard a lot about that, affordable housing, transparency, and it could be anything, right? It could be public safety concerns. It could be something as like street lights, or, I get emails about dumpsters and street lights and traffic, do you think you could help me on this? Do you think you could talk to this person? So everybody has their personal story. There are things that affect their life, and that's what I want to be able to affect. I want to go to Beacon Hill respectfully with the people's vote on September the 3rd and affect their life, positively.
Now, if you do win this primary on the 3rd for the 7th district seat, you mentioned affordable housing being one of your focuses with your financial background, but what are some other major goals that you would have if you are to win election?
Yeah, so also we talk about energy. I want to continue to push getting towards net zero, the reliance on fossil fuels. I'll sponsor a bill day one to make sure that we have a strategy and we implement it. At the end of the last legislation session, everything collapsed when it came to climate bills and the economic bill. So that's another thing. Also, education. I want to retain the MCAS. I want to be able to vote for that, but have the flexibility for all students and their independent needs. I don't want to eliminate it. I do believe the baseline of having a 10th grade reading level is necessary. You have to have at least that baseline. Also, in terms of transportation, we have to modernize our transportation. Our infrastructure is old, and it shouldn't be. Boston, Framingham, Ashland shouldn't be this far behind in public transportation because that does lead into jobs. That does lead into housing. So we have to be more effective. So these are things that I'll sponsor on day one, I'll get involved in, and I'll also advocate. I want to go up and advocate veterans benefits. I want to advocate for people that don't have a voice. And part of the transparency, even though it's repeated and repeated, is important because I want people to know how I'm voting. So if they don't like a vote, they can come and talk to me. They can send an email. At least we know where people and, our legislators stand on public safety, things like that, things of that nature.
Right. Now, Representative Lewis has touted his experience in working not only in the State House to back certain pieces of legislation that have gotten over the finish line, but he's also touted his interactions with constituents of the 7th District as part of his reasoning for re-election. What would your response to those notions be?
Could you repeat what you're saying?
Sure, yeah. So
he's
mentioned both his experience at the State House, and he's also mentioned his experience of interacting with members of the Framingham and Ashland community who comprise the district.
Yeah, so me as well, right? So I'm a trustee on the Affordable Ashland Affordable Trust. I'm a trustee. I'm also on the Ashland Democratic Town Committee. And I speak to everybody. I speak to all the constituency and all the leaders of the community. I'm very involved in the community as well. And at the end of the day, this vote is going to be about we the people. This vote isn't going to be about the people all the politicians that endorse you. This is really bring it back to the people so the people can make a decision, an informed decision on what solutions are you going to bring to Beacon Hill. I want to actually bring solutions. So when I say affordable housing, that's not just a buzzword. That's actually working with mass housing and down payment solutions, working with how do we incentivize strategically developers, builders? How do we continue to grow 200,000 units in a state that's short, right? So these are actual solutions, actual things that need to happen, not just buzzwords and not just who I know, who endorses me. Because the people don't care about that. The people care about everyday solutions for our economy. How do I put food on the table, clothes on my back, and a roof over my head?
Would you say that's part of the differentiator if someone's going to be stepping into the ballot box to vote for you compared to Representative Lewis? Because for someone who may not be following every step of this race, who is a Democrat, they could look at your website and Representative Lewis's website and see a lot of common ground, which is sort of the nature of a primary, right? I mean, you both vouch for progress, for progressive values, both stress education as being a major part of your platforms, housing, public transportation, like you had just mentioned, protecting rights, like you mentioned at the top. What would you say is the biggest differentiator between you and your opponent?
So in 2021, in July 2021, Jack Lewis voted for public legislation votes to not be public in committee. Would never do that. The reason why I would never do that is I want my constituency to know how I'm going to vote. And I want them to be able to have conversation. Let's have open dialogue about what I voted for. I don't know if you asked Jack Lewis, but if you do, ask him the reason why he voted no to that. Secondly, 2023, he voted for a $1 billion tax cut, the first tax cut in 20 years in this state. We are down $322 million, like I spoke about. These are things that are fundamental issues. So I'm actually going off of record that he's gone off of. I agree, we're both Democrats, but these are major things. To be down, just for example, to be flat or to be down that much money as a state, Chapter 70 funding in terms of education, we're going to lose social workers. We're going to lose teaching positions, public safety positions. We can't be flat because 2.5% is CPI inflation every year, which is teachers' raises, firefighter raises. That's if you're flat. Now, if you're down, we're in trouble. So we need someone that can put that pressure. With all respect to Jack Lewis, I believe he's from the nonprofit sector. I do think me, with my stronger financial sector background, can help because the economy is very important to people.
Now, shifting back to what you mentioned a couple of minutes ago, the importance of we the people, of course, that's part of the backbone of this democracy that we have in the country. With 2024 being such a huge election cycle, how important is it for people to realize the importance of going to the polls, not just for the national races, president, Senate, House of Representatives in Washington, but these local races such as state rep as well?
Extremely important. Extremely important. We all know that the presidential race is as important as ever. Our democracy is on the line. Never would take away from that. But it is your local politicians that are dealing with your day-to-day life, right? So all of the local politicians, whether it's city council, your state representative, your state senator, your congressman, your governor, these are politicians and legislatures that actually affect your day-to-day life by the legislation that they pass, which is why I bring up it's very important to be able to count the record of your state representative. We need to know how your state representative votes, and that's why I'm running. But I'm also excited about the presidential election. I'm very excited about Kamala Harris and just the whole idea and the excitement around that in the Democrat Party.
Right. Now, when people are filling out their mail-in ballots leading up to the 3rd, or if they go for early voting, or if they're actually at the polls on primary day, September the 3rd, what's the one thing you would want them to remember when looking at this vote for state representative?
When you look at this vote, know that you should know how your state representative votes. And if you humbly vote for Carlton Phelps, Brendan, then at that point you will know how your state representative votes, and we will be able to have an open dialogue, whether you agree with me or you not. If you don't agree with me, we'll be able to have an open dialogue about what your needs are in Ashland and Framingham.
Carlton, anything else you want to add while we still have you here?
No, just thanks for having me. And September 3rd, primary, please come to the polls. And, I look forward to speaking with everyone and knocking on your doors and talking to you.
Carlton Phelps, again, thank you for coming into the studio today. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Brendan.